The sun did not rise that morning. It clawed its way over the blood-red mesas and spilled molten gold across the desert floor. And when it found Evangeline Harrow's face, the only part of her still breathing above the sand, it burned her eyelids shut and turned her tears to salt before they could fall. She was 30 years old. Black hair matted with dust and yesterday's henna, lips cracked like drought-split earth. And she was buried so deep in the dry wash that the weight of the world pressed on her chest and made every heartbeat a negotiation with death. The wind moaned through the creosote and carried the smell of creosote and something worse, old blood baked into the ground. Somewhere far off, a coyote laughed at a joke only the desert understood. Evangeline could not move her arms, could not feel her legs. The sand had been packed around her at dusk by men who wore bandanas over their faces and called themselves the Congregation of the Hollow Womb. They had sung while they worked, low and tuneless, a hymn about barren women and the mercy of being returned to the earth that would never receive their seed. She remembered the bite of the shovel blades, the way the grain slid cold down her collarbone before they turned warm from her own fear. Now the sun was a branding iron, and the silence was worse than the singing. She tried to scream. Only a croak came, the sound of a woman who had already used up every plea the night before. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. The desert shimmered. Heat devils danced above the sand like mocking spirits. Then came the HOOFBEATS dot slow, deliberate, one horse. No rider talking, no spurs singing. The rhythm said the rider had all the time in the world and no intention of wasting it. Dust rose in a thin red plume beyond the lip of the wash. Evangeline's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her teeth. She forced her eyes open against the glare. A shadow fell across her face, long, lean, cut sharp by the morning light. The horse stopped. Leather creaked. Boots hit the ground with the soft finality of a coffin lid. A man stood over her. He wore a black duster gone gray with trail dust, hat brim curled like a rattlesnake's tail. A silver scar split his left eyebrow and ran down to the corner of his mouth, tugging it into a permanent half-snarl. His eyes were the pale, merciless blue of winter sky over high Desertno mountain passes. A Colt hung low on his right hip, and the butt was wrapped in rawhide darkened by years of sweat. He crouched, elbows on his knees, and studied her the way a man studies a map he's already memorized. Morning. "Mrs. Harrow," he said, voice soft as wind through dead grass. "Name's Silas Crowder. Folks say I find things that don't want finding. Your husband paid me half in advance to bring you back alive." He paused, tilted his head. "Didn't say nothing about you being planted like a goddamn tulip." Evangeline tried to speak. Sand scraped her throat raw. Silas reached into his coat, pulled out a canteen, unscrewed the cap with his teeth. He tipped it to her lips. The first drop touched her tongue like a miracle. She gulped, choked, gulped again. Water ran down her chin and cut pale trails through the dust on her neck. "Slow," he warned. "You'll cramp and die ugly." She drank until he pulled it away. He sat back on his heels, rolled a cigarette with one hand, never taking those winter eyes off her. "Question is," he said, striking a match on his thumbnail, "do you want to be dug up? Because the men who put you here, they take their religion serious. They'll come back tonight to see if the desert kept you or spat you out. And if you're gone, they'll burn Rattlesnake Wash until they find the man who took you." The match flared. Tobacco glowed. Smoke curled between them like incense. Evangeline found her voice, small and cracked but steady. "My husband sent you?" "Sent me 3 weeks ago, soon as you vanished from the stage at Diablo Pass." Silas exhaled toward the sky. "He's a banker from back east. Soft hands. Cries when he talks about you. Paid in gold eagles and a photograph of you in a blue dress." He tapped ash onto the sand inches from her cheek. "I don't usually take marriage jobs. but the money was good and the desert's been boring. She closed her eyes. Shame hotter than the sun flooded her. He thinks I ran away. You didn't? I was taken. The words tasted like rust. They said I was cursed, that I killed my babies before they drew breath. 3 times. Her voice broke on the last word. They said the only mercy was to give me back to the mother who never lets anything grow. Silas studied her for a long moment. Somewhere a vulture circled lower. He stood, looked east where heat already warped the air, then west where the congregation's camp lay hidden among the red rocks. He took one last drag, flicked the cigarette away. Mercy's a funny thing, he said. Sometimes it looks a lot like a grave. He drew the Colt, spun the cylinder once, click, 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 then holstered it. Sometimes, he said, it looks like a man with a shovel and nothing to lose. He walked to his horse, pulled a short-handled spade from the saddle ties, and came back. The blade bit into the sand beside her ear with a dry crunch. First, shovelful. Second, sand began to slide away from her shoulders like an hourglass running backward. Evangeline turned, her face toward the sound, tears cutting clean lines down her temples into her hair. Don't thank me yet, Silas muttered, sweat already darkening his shirt. We ain't out of the wash. And the congregation don't take kindly to resurrection. Far off, a bell began to toll 3 slow iron notes carried on the hot wind from the hidden camp. The sound of men waking to prayer. Or to judgment. Silas paused, looked toward the rocks, then dug faster. The desert held its breath. The sun had climbed to its cruelest height when Silas finally struck something that wasn't sand. The shovel blade rang against iron. Evangeline's breath hitched. She felt the vibration travel through the last packed grains and into her ribs like a death knell. Silas dropped to his knees, clawed with bare hands. A rusted chain appeared, thick as a man's wrist, wrapped 3 times around her waist and staked deep with an iron pin driven into bedrock. The congregation had not trusted the desert alone to keep her. Goddamn fanatics, he muttered, voice raw from dust. He yanked the pin. It came free with a sucking pop. The chain slithered loose and he flung it aside like a dead snake. Evangeline tried to rise. Her legs had no memory of weight. She collapsed forward into Silas's arms, face pressed to the sweat-soaked hollow of his throat. He smelled of tobacco, horse, and something metallic, gun oil, and old blood. She clung to him because the world was spinning and the only solid thing left was this stranger who had chosen to dig her out of her own grave. Easy, he said against her hair. Bones ain't woke up yet. He half carried her to the shade of a lone ironwood tree, its leaves rattling like dry bones. There he sat her against the trunk, poured the last of the canteen over her cracked lips, then over her head. The water ran pink where it met the blood crusted at her hairline. From his saddlebag, he drew a flask, not water, whiskey. He tipped it to her mouth. She coughed, fire racing down her throat, but warmth followed, the first warmth in 2 days that wasn't the sun trying to cook her alive. Across the wash, heat still shimmered, but now it carried movement. Black specks on the ridgeline, riders. 8, maybe 10. Robes the color of bone, horses the color of drought. Even at this distance she could see the glint of rifles across their saddles. Silas saw them too. His face did not change, but the scar pulled tighter. Congregations early, he said. They must have felt the ground give you back. Evangeline's voice was a whisper. They'll kill you for this. They'll try. He checked the Colt, then drew a second gun from behind his back, short-barreled shotgun, sawed-off and vicious. Question is how many I take with me. She grabbed his wrist with fingers that still trembled. There's a back way. Through the slot canyon behind the ironwood. My father prospected these parts before the fever took him. I know the turns. Silas looked at her then, really looked. Something shifted behind the winter eyes. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. You always this useful when somebody pulls you out of a hole? Only when I don't want them buried next to me. A ghost of a smile tugged the scarred corner of his mouth. He helped her stand. Her legs buckled. He caught her, swung her up into the saddle instead of behind. She was too weak to hold on. Then he vaulted up behind her, one arm locking around her waist like an iron band. Hold tight, Evangeline Harrow. We're about to make the devil sweat. He spurred the horse. The animal lunged forward, hooves drumming thunder across the baked clay. Behind them, the first rifle cracked. A bullet whined overhead and buried itself in the ironwood. They plunged into the mouth of the slot canyon. Just as the riders crested the ridge, the canyon was a wound in the earth, red walls rising sheer on both sides. So narrow the sky became a burning ribbon overhead. Wind screamed through it like a dying woman. Silas kept the horse at a dead run, trusting Evangeline's memory. She pressed her cheek to the horse's neck and whispered turns before they came. Left at the petrified tree, right where the wall bleeds iron, straight past the place where the ancients carved their spiral into stone. Bullets ricocheted off rock, sparking orange. One took a chip out of the wall inches from Silas's head. Fragments stung his cheek and drew fresh blood. They burst out the far end into a dry lake bed ringed by jagged peaks. Mirage water shimmered ahead, false hope. Silas reined in hard, horse sliding on its haunches. Evangeline's heart hammered against his encircling arm. They'll be on us in minutes, not if we disappear. He wheeled the horse toward a crease in the cliff face barely wider than a coffin. Old prospector trick. Breathe shallow. He forced the horse into the crevice. Rock scraped Evangeline's knees raw. Darkness swallowed them, cool and sudden as baptism. The horse snorted, terrified. But Silas spoke low in its ear, words she didn't know, maybe Comanche. Maybe just the language of men who lived too long with death. They went 20 yards, 30, until the crevice opened into a hidden bowl, a pocket valley no map had ever marked. Cottonwoods grew around a steep spring, green against the red rock like a secret kept for 1,000 years. Petroglyphs stared down from the walls, stick figures with hollow bellies, women holding up empty hands to a sun that had no face. Silas slid from the saddle, caught Evangeline as she half fell. Her legs still wouldn't hold her. He carried her to the spring, laid her on soft moss older than any church. She drank from cupped hands while he tended the horse, then cleaned the new cut on his cheek with whiskey and a strip torn from his own shirt tail. Only when the horse was cool and the guns reloaded did he sit beside her, silent, stretched, broken only by the trickle of water and the distant, muffled thunder of hooves somewhere far above, the congregation riding past the hidden entrance. Cursing the empty lake bed, Evangeline studied his profile. Why are you doing this? You could have taken the gold and ridden away when you saw what they'd done. Silas rolled another cigarette, didn't light it. Maybe I don't like seeing a woman punished for something that ain't her fault. It is my fault, she said quietly. 3 babies gone before they quickened. The doctors back east said scar tissue, said bad luck. The congregation said sin. My husband, her voice cracked. He looked at me like I was already a ghost. Silas struck a match, cupped the flame. Men are cowards when they can't fix something. Easier to blame the woman than admit the world's broken. She stared at him. You sound like you know. He exhaled smoke toward the hidden sky. Had a wife once. Little place outside Abilene. She carried twice. Both times the blood came too early. Second time it took her with it. Town said she was cursed. I buried her under a cedar and left before I started burning churches. The confession hung between them like incense. Evangeline reached out, touched the scar that split his eyebrow. He didn't flinch. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. Just means I know what hollow feels like." He caught her hand, held it a moment, then let go. "Difference is, you're still breathing. That counts for something." Above them, the searchers' voices faded into the wind. Night fell sudden and cold in the hidden valley. Silas built no fire, too much risk. They sat shoulder to shoulder against the rock, sharing warmth and silence. Stars crowded the strip of sky visible between the cliffs, bright enough to hurt. Evangeline spoke into the dark. "They'll never stop. The congregation believes if a barren woman walks free, the land itself will die. They've poisoned wells before, burned ranches." Silas was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. "Then there's a town 2 days west. San Cielo. Territorial marshal there owes me a life debt from the war. We get you there. He'll put you on a train east, new name, new start. Your husband be damned. And you?" "I'll handle the congregation." His voice was winter again. "One way or another." She turned to him, moonlight silver on her dust-streaked face. "Come with me." He laughed once, short, humorless. "Men like me don't get new starts, Evangeline. We just keep riding till the desert or the bullet decides we're done." She leaned in and kissed him. Not soft, not sweet. Desperate, tasting of whiskey and blood and the salt of both their tears. For a moment he was still. Then his hand came up to cradle the back of her head, scarred fingers gentle against her bruised scalp. And he kissed her back like a man who'd forgotten he was still allowed to want anything. When they broke apart, breath clouding in the cold, she rested her forehead against his. "Then let me remember what it feels like to be wanted," she whispered, "before the desert takes us both." Somewhere above, an owl called 3 lonely notes. Silas pulled her closer, wrapped his duster around them both, and held her while the hidden valley kept their secret and the night grew deeper than any grave. Dawn came violet and merciless, slipping between the cliffs like a blade. Silas was already moving when Evangeline opened her eyes, saddling the horse, checking loads, filling the canteen from the seep. He had not slept. The scar on his face looked white against new stubble, and his eyes carried the flat shine of a man who had crossed some private river in the night and burned the boat behind him. She sat up slowly. Every muscle felt hammered. Between her legs the ache was worse. Sand had worked its way into places no woman should ever feel grit. But she was alive, and the man who had made that possible was pretending last night's kiss had never happened. "We ride hard today," he said without looking at her. "They'll have dogs by now. Congregation breeds mastiffs the size of ponies. Once they pick up our scent in the lake bed, this pocket won't stay secret long." Evangeline stood, steadying herself against the rock. "Then let's not be here when they arrive." He glanced at her then, something unreadable flickering across his face. Approval, maybe, or fear. They left the hidden valley the back way, a deer trail so narrow the stirrups scraped stone. The horse picked its way upward, lungs heaving in the thin air. At the crest they looked down, the dry lake bed already, crawled with black-robed figures and the glint of sun on gun barrels. Dogs bayed, deep and hungry. One rider pointed straight at the crevice they had used. Yesterday, Silas spat a curse and kicked the horse into a trot along the ridge. All morning they rode the high backbone of the range. Wind knifing through their clothes, sun hammering the rock until it threw heat back like a forge. Evangeline clung to the saddle horn, Silas's arm the only thing keeping her from sliding off. When the horse stumbled, he dismounted and led it on foot, boots bleeding inside cracked leather but never slowing. By noon the animal was blown, lather white as bone. Silas found a seep under an overhang, let the horse drink, then poured the last trickle over Evangeline's head. She caught his wrist. "You'll kill us all if you don't rest. Rest is a luxury for people who aren't hunted." His voice was raw. "We're less than a day from San Cielo. After that, you're somebody else's problem." The words struck her like a slap. She let go of his wrist. They moved again. The land fell away into broken canyons, red and gold and vicious. Twice they heard dogs far below, voices echoing up the walls. Each time Silas changed direction, leading them along dry washes where the wind erased their tracks. Within minutes, late afternoon painted the sky the color of fresh liver. They came down off the ridge onto a forgotten wagon road half swallowed by mesquite. Ahead, heat mirage danced above the flats, the promise of San Cielo. And between them and the town, the congregation waited. 20 riders spread in a crescent across the road, robes whipping like funeral flags. At their center stood a tall man on a white mule, face hidden beneath a hood stitched with a crimson empty womb, the high witness, the one who had ordered Evangeline buried alive. Dogs strained at chains thick as a man's arm. Silas reined in. The horse shuddered beneath them. "End of the line?" he said quietly. Evangeline's heart hammered so hard she tasted iron. "There's too many." "Counted 22. 6 dogs. I've had worse odds." "Liar." He almost smiled. "Probably." The high witness raised one pale hand. The riders leveled rifles. Silas eased Evangeline to the ground, then dismounted himself. He stood in front of her like a wall. "Afternoon, witness," he called, voice carrying clear across the flats. "Heard you lost something." The hooded man's voice was soft, almost kind. "The Barren woman belongs to the earth. Return her, and you may ride away." "Can't do that." Silas rested his hand on the colt. "She's under my protection." "Protection is illusion," the witness said. "Only the womb that fails must be returned to silence. It is written." Silas drew and fired in one motion. The bullet took the nearest dog between the eyes. It dropped without a sound. Chaos exploded. Rifles cracked, horses reared, dogs lunged against chains. Silas shoved Evangeline behind a boulder, returned fire cool and steady. 2 riders fell. A third screamed as his horse went down on top of him. But there were too many. Bullets whined off rock, showering them with splinters. The horse screamed and bolted, saddle empty. Silas's left arm bloomed red. He'd taken a round high in the shoulder. He kept shooting until the Colt clicked empty, then switched to the shotgun. Evangeline crouched behind the rock, ears ringing, tasting gunpowder and terror. She saw Silas stagger as another bullet tore cloth at his side. Blood soaked his shirt like spilled wine. She looked around desperately. 10 feet away lay a dead rider, Spencer carbine still clutched in stiff hands. Without thinking, she ran. Bullets kicked dust at her heels. She dove, rolled, came up with the rifle. Her father had taught her to shoot jackrabbits at 12. The muscle memory was still there. She levered around, sighted on the nearest dog lunging for Silas's throat, and pulled the trigger. The animal dropped mid-leap. Silas glanced back, eyes wide for the first time. Then something like pride flashed across his blood-streaked face. Together they fought, he with the shotgun roaring death, she with the Spencer steady as prayer. Riders fell. Dogs died yelping. The crescent broke, became a circle, then a panicked knot. The high witness wheeled his mule, robe flapping like broken wings, and fled toward the darkening east. His remaining men followed, leaving their dead behind. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the wet sound of Silas breathing through his teeth. He sank to one knee. Blood dripped steady from his arm and side, staining the dust black in the low light. Evangeline dropped the rifle, ran to him. She tore strips from her petticoat, pressed them hard against the wounds. "You fool," she sobbed. "You beautiful, stupid man." He laughed once, wet-pained. Told you I had worse odds. Sanchiello's lamps flickered into view 2 miles away. Yellow and warm and impossibly far. She looked at the dead scattered around them, at the blood soaking into the greedy earth, at Silas's face going gray beneath the dust. "We have to move," she said. "Can't ride double anymore," he rasped. "Take the rifle. Walk. Marshall's name is Tate. Tell him Silas Crowder finally came to collect. I'm not leaving you. Evangeline." His good hand caught hers, gripped surprisingly strong. "You wanted to be someone else. Go be her. Live loud enough for both of us." Tears cut clean trails down her cheeks. "Not without you." Headlights, no, lantern light, bobbed on the road from town. A wagon, fast. Someone had heard the shooting. Silas sagged against her. "Damn stubborn woman," he whispered, but there was wonder in it. She held him tight as the wagon rattled closer. Shouting voices and the smell of hope riding the evening wind behind them. The desert swallowed the dead without a sound, already erasing every trace of the battle, the blood, the miracle. But the woman once buried alive was still breathing, and the man who had dug her out was still warm against her heart. For now, that was enough. The wagon that rattled out of Sanchiello carried 3 men and 1 lantern swinging wild on a hook. The driver was old Marshall Tate himself, gray mustache. Limp from Shiloh, flanked by 2 deputies who looked barely old enough to shave. They took in the carnage on the road, the dead in their bone-colored robes, the woman streaked with blood and gun smoke, and the man bleeding out against her chest. Tate's eyes found Silas's half-open ones. "Crowder? You son of a bitch," he said, almost gentle. "Told you the war wasn't done with you yet." Silas tried to grin. It came out a grimace. "Collecting that favor, Tate. Get her on a train." Tate didn't waste words. The deputies lifted Silas into the wagon bed like he was made of glass and dynamite both. Evangeline climbed in beside him, cradling his head in her lap while the wagon lurched back toward the lights of town. Every rut in the road drew a hiss of pain from Silas, but he kept his eyes on her face the whole way, as if memorizing it against the dark that was crowding his edges. Ciello's doctor had lost 3 fingers to a Comanche lance years before, but the 2 that remained were steady. He poured whiskey over the wounds, dug out the bullets with a probe that looked more like a rusty ice pick, and sewed Silas together with black thread and curses. Evangeline held the lantern and did not look away once. When it was done, the doctor wiped his hands on a rag that had once been white. "He'll live if fever don't take him. Lost a lake of blood. Needs a week flat on his back." Silas, pale as chalk, managed to rasp. "Ain't got a week. Congregation's high witness is still breathing. He'll burn half the territory to finish what he started." Tate stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. "Let him come. I got 20 deputies now and a Gatling gun the army left behind. Sanchiello ain't some desert prayer circle." Evangeline looked from the marshal to the man on the cot. Something fierce and exhausted settled in her chest. "No," she said. "We end this tonight." Silas tried to sit up. The doctor shoved him back down. "Woman, you're both half dead." "Not dead enough," she answered. She left the room long enough to wash the blood from her hands and face, to borrow a clean shirt and a belt that almost fit. When she came back, she carried Silas's Colt, cleaned and loaded. She set it on the blanket over his chest like a promise. "Rest," she told him. "I'll be back before sunrise." He caught her wrist with surprising strength. "Evangeline." "Don't. I was buried alive once," she said quietly. "I won't live looking over my shoulder for the shovel again." She kissed him, soft this time, deliberate, and walked out into the night. Sanchiello Street was quiet except for the wind whirring at shutters. She went to the livery, saddled the strongest horse she could find, and rode east alone under a moon the color of a fresh scar. She knew where they would be, 3 hours out, where the land dropped into a bowl of black volcanic rock. The congregation had built their tabernacle, adobe walls bleached the color of old bones, a bell tower made from wagon wheels and cow skulls. Torches burned along the wall. She could hear the low chant long before she saw the glow. Evangeline left the horse a quarter-mile back and walked the rest, boots silent on the cooling sand. She had taken one of Silas's sticks of dynamite from his saddlebag. Fuse already cut short. At the gate 2 guards in bone robes stood with rifles. She stepped into the torchlight. "I am the Barren woman," she called, voice steady as winter iron. "Come finish your sacrament." They raised their rifles. She shot the first through the throat before the barrel cleared leather. The second got off one wild shot that sparked off rock beside her ear. She put 2 rounds in his chest and kept walking. The courtyard exploded into chaos. Men running, women in gray dresses clutching children, the bell clanging frantic alarm. She moved through them like a storm, cold barking, dropping any man who raised a weapon. She did not hurry. She had been afraid for so long that fear had burned itself out and left something clean and terrible behind. She found the high witness in the chapel, kneeling before an altar made of sun-bleached pelvis bones. Candles guttered in the wind that followed her through the doors. He did not turn. "You were given mercy," he said. "The earth should have kept you. Your earth failed." She thumbed back the hammer. "Stand up." He rose slowly. The hood fell back, revealing a face younger than she expected, no older than Silas. Handsome once, now eaten away by certainty. His eyes were gentle, almost sorrowful. "You could still repent," he said. "Lie down in the sand again. Let the desert finish its forgiveness." Evangeline felt the old shame try to rise, the old whisper that she was broken, poisoned, unworthy. She looked at the altar of bones and felt only rage. "I am not the one who needs forgiveness." She shot him twice in the chest. He looked surprised, almost grateful, and folded to the floor like an empty robe. Outside, the last of the congregation fled into the night, robes flapping like startled crows. She lit the fuse on the dynamite with the altar candle, set it beneath the bone altar, and walked out. The explosion lit the desert for miles, adobe walls folding inward, the bell tower toppling in a storm of fire and dust. She stood on a rise and watched. It burned until there was nothing left but embers and the smell of scorched bone. Then she rode back to San Cielo. Dawn was bleeding, pale gold across the sky when she stepped through the doctor's door again. Silas was sitting up against the protests of everyone in the room, shirtless, bandaged, eyes bloodshot but alive. He took her in, smell of smoke in her hair. Fresh powder burns on her hands, and something ancient and tender moved across his scarred face. "You look like hell." "Evangeline Harrow. You should see the other fellow." He opened his good arm. She crossed the room and let him pull her down beside him. She buried her face in the warm crook of his neck and cried, not from sorrow this time, but from the sheer weight of being alive and unburied and unafraid. Marshal Tate cleared his throat from the doorway. "Train leaves at 9 for the coast. Got a ticket with any name you want on it." Silas's arm tightened around her. "Make it 2 tickets. Evangeline lifted her head. "You said men like you don't get new starts." "I was wrong," he said simply. "Turns out some graves spit you back out twice." She laughed. The sound startled birds from the rooftops of San Cielo and kissed him again. Tasting blood and whiskey and tomorrow. Later, when the sun was fully up and the town was stirring, they walked together to the station. Silas leaned on her more than he would admit, but his steps were steady enough. The train waited, steam curling like incense, whistle already calling. As they climbed aboard, Evangeline looked back once at the desert stretching red and endless behind them. The smoke from the ruined tabernacle still rose in a thin black prayer against the sky. She squeezed Silas's hand. The train lurched, wheels singing on steel, carrying them west toward salt wind and green hills neither of them had ever seen. Behind them, the desert kept its old secrets and its new ones, the ashes of a false church, the bones of false prophets, and the faint, stubborn tracks of a woman who had been buried alive and chose, against every prophecy, to rise and somewhere out there in the burning waste. The wind finally stopped laughing.